Something explosive happened before sunrise, and by the time the world woke up, the game was already over. While Sydney was busy polishing champagne glasses and preparing velvet chairs for a $3,200 exclusive retreat, a completely different scene was unfolding in the dark silence of Adelaide Cottage. No cameras, no announcements, just quiet, calculated movement. And at the center of it, William, already awake, already working, already done waiting. This wasn't a reaction, this wasn't panic, this was something far colder, something planned, something that had been building for months, maybe years. And that morning, it snapped, because what looked like a glamorous besties retreat on the surface, beneath it, insiders say, it had become something far more dangerous, something that crossed a line the monarchy could no longer pretend not to see. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Think about it. A luxury weekend, carefully curated manifestation sessions, organic dinners, elite packages, and the biggest selling point, a guaranteed group photo with the Duchess. Not charity, not service, not duty, just access. Access with a price tag. A title turned into a ticket. And that's where everything changed. Because while organizers were busy finalizing seating charts and confirming premium guests, a different list was forming somewhere else entirely. A list of instructions, legal directives, diplomatic moves, phone calls that weren't asking questions, they were delivering decisions. People on the receiving end weren't debating, they were being told. And the word quietly circulating among insiders, strike. Not a warning, not a discussion, a strike. But here's where it gets even more intense, because this didn't come out of nowhere. No, this moment had been building under the surface, slowly, quietly, like pressure in a sealed room. And what triggered the explosion wasn't just the event itself, it was the reaction to it. Within 24 hours, just 24 hours, over 100,000 people signed a petition. Not organized, not coordinated, just raw, immediate backlash. A wave of public anger that moved faster than anyone expected. And the message wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. It was blunt, sharp, and impossible to ignore. People saw something and they didn't like what they saw, because to them it didn't look like empowerment. It looked like something else entirely. And suddenly, questions started spreading fast. Why is a royal title being used like this? Why are people paying thousands just to stand near it? And the most uncomfortable one of all, why does it feel like the line between public service and private profit has completely disappeared? That's the moment everything shifted. Because inside the palace, silence had always been the strategy. Let things fade. Let attention move on. Avoid confrontation. But this time, silence started to look like agreement. And that's where it became dangerous. Because if you don't stop something like this, what message are you sending? That it's acceptable? That it's normal? That the monarchy itself is something you can rent? And that's the thought that reportedly kept William at his desk that morning. Not anger, not emotion, but calculation. A realization that this wasn't just about one event, it was about what the institution would become if this continued. So he made a decision. And once that decision was made, everything started moving. At exactly the moment when Sydney was leaning into the illusion of prestige, something invisible but devastating was already on its way. A single document quietly sent through official channels. No drama, no press, just a few paragraphs. But those paragraphs, they changed everything. Because in one move, the entire narrative flipped. No longer a royal visit. No longer something tied to the institution. Just private individuals running a private commercial event. Simple words, massive consequences. Because once that classification changed, everything built around the event started collapsing. The invisible support system, the thing no one talks about but everyone relies on, vanished instantly. No official backing, no state-level legitimacy, no assumption of support, and most critically, no automatic security coverage. And that's where the real shock hit. Because high-profile appearances like this don't just happen. They require massive security infrastructure. Millions. And until that moment, there had been an unspoken assumption someone else would handle it, someone else would pay. But now, that assumption was gone. And suddenly, the numbers didn't look so glamorous anymore. Because charging $3,200 per ticket sounds impressive until you realize the cost behind the scenes could swallow it whole. And just like that, what looked like a luxury experience started to feel like a financial trap. And it didn't stop there. Because as the morning unfolded, more calls went out. Not loud, not emotional, just direct. precise, strategic. And the message was crystal clear, this event, it's not official, it's not endorsed, and any attempt to treat it like it is would be a mistake. That's when panic started spreading. Organizers who had built everything around the idea of prestige suddenly found themselves standing on nothing, because the very thing they were selling, the weight, the authority, the aura of a royal title, had just been stripped of its power in this context. And once that happens, the illusion breaks. Sponsors began asking questions. Partners started hesitating. And behind closed doors, conversations shifted from excitement to damage control. Because without that official glow, what exactly were they paying for? And that's the uncomfortable truth no one wanted to say out loud. Because when you remove the title's institutional weight, what's left? That question started echoing everywhere. And by late morning, the cracks were already visible. But here's the part that makes this story feel almost surreal. While all of this chaos was unfolding, there was no dramatic confrontation, no public fight, no emotional explosion, just quiet, methodical dismantling. Piece by piece, step by step, like someone who had already mapped out exactly how it would end. Because this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. And at the center of it all was one idea, a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. No more half in, half out, no more balancing between two worlds, no more using the system without belonging to it. That middle ground, it was disappearing in real time. And the people caught inside it were starting to feel it. Because by the time the sun was fully up, what had been marketed as a triumphant return was quietly turning into something else entirely. Something unstable, something exposed, something that just hours earlier no one thought could fall apart this fast. And yet it was only the beginning. Because what happened next didn't just shake the event, it shook everything around it. And just when it seemed like the damage had reached its peak, it didn't stop. It accelerated. Because the moment that quiet classification went through, the moment that single memo redefined everything, the dominoes didn't fall slowly, they collapsed all at once. And the first cracks turned into fractures so fast that even insiders couldn't keep up with how quickly the situation was unraveling. Within barely an hour, the whisper started. Within 2, they turned into confirmations. And before midday, the entire structure that had been built so carefully around that Sydney retreat was already losing its foundation. Sponsors, big ones, the kind that don't move unless something serious shifts, started pulling back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Quiet internal reviews, emergency meetings, legal teams stepping in, and then exits. Clean, quick, and final. Because the logic had changed overnight. What they had signed up for was prestige, royal association, a connection to something bigger, something globally recognized, something that carried weight. But now, that weight had been officially removed, and suddenly, the same event that once looked like an opportunity looked like a risk, a reputational risk, a financial risk, a brand risk. And no corporation with even a basic survival instinct stays attached to something like that. So they left, one after another, and the numbers started to tell a story no one could spin. More than half the sponsorship gone in hours, not days, not weeks, hours. And with every withdrawal, the illusion cracked a little more. Because each exit wasn't just about money, it was a signal that the value everyone thought was there might never have been real in the way they believed. And that's when the atmosphere shifted completely. Because now, it wasn't just criticism, it wasn't just a petition, it wasn't just public frustration, it was something colder, something more permanent. It was rejection. Behind closed doors, phones were ringing nonstop. Urgent calls, recalculations, attempts to salvage whatever could still be saved. But the problem wasn't logistical. It wasn't a scheduling issue. It wasn't something you could fix with a better statement or a quick adjustment. The problem was structural. The entire model had depended on one thing, the power of a title. And that power had just been neutralized. Think about how brutal that is. Not taken away, not erased, just stripped of its ability to generate value in that context. Like turning off electricity in a building that still looks intact from the outside. Everything appears the same, but nothing works anymore. And that's exactly what was happening. Because once that realization hit, the bigger question started creeping in. The one no one wanted to say out loud, but everyone was thinking. If the title can't be used this way, what's left? And suddenly, everything started being re-evaluated through that lens. Ticket prices that once felt justified side now felt excessive. Packages that once felt exclusive now felt exposed. And the experience that had been marketed so confidently now looked fragile because the premium wasn't about the event. It was about proximity. And when the meaning of that proximity changes, the entire equation collapses. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. While one side was dealing with fallout, scrambling to hold things together, trying to contain a situation that was slipping further out of control with every passing minute, the other side was calm, focused, unmoved, because this wasn't chaos for them. This was execution. Every move had already been decided, every consequence already understood. And as the day unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about one event. It was about drawing a line so clear, so undeniable, that no one could pretend it didn't exist anymore. And that line, it came into full view later that afternoon, because what happened next wasn't just another step, it was the final lock. A directive, formal, precise, impossible to misinterpret, quietly confirmed something that changed the entire game permanently. The title could remain, but its use? Restricted, controlled, severed from anything that could turn it into a commercial tool. And just like that, the transformation was complete. The very thing that had powered everything, the recognition, the influence, the ability to command attention and price, was still there in name but gone in function. A symbol without leverage. And that's the moment the realization truly hit. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't something that would fade with time. This was permanent, because once you remove the mechanism that creates value, you don't just damage a system, you end it. And the ripple effects were immediate. In industry circles, conversations shifted almost instantly. What had once been seen as a powerful brand, controversial, yes, but still valuable, was now being looked at differently, more cautiously, more critically, and most importantly, more realistically. Because without that institutional backing, without that invisible layer of credibility, the entire proposition had to stand on its own. And that's a much harder test. Deals that once seemed possible suddenly looked uncertain. Opportunities that once felt guaranteed now required reconsideration. And quietly, behind the scenes, a new label started forming. Not publicly, not officially, but unmistakably. A liability. And that's the kind of shift that doesn't make headlines immediately, but changes everything over time. Because once that perception takes hold, it spreads, it shapes decisions, it influences deals, it closes doors before they're even opened. And by the time anyone realizes how far it's gone, it's already too late to reverse. But perhaps the most devastating part of all this wasn't financial. It wasn't reputational. It was personal. Because somewhere in the middle of all this, something else was breaking. Not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. A realization that the space that once seemed possible, the idea that you could step away but still hold on, that you could exist between two worlds, that you could redefine the rules and still benefit from both sides, that space no longer existed. It had been closed, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with precision. And that's what made it so final. Because you can argue with emotion, you can respond to criticism, but you can't negotiate with the system that has already moved on without you. And as the day came to an end, the full weight of what had happened started settling in. The retreat that was supposed to be a comeback had become a collapse. The moment that was meant to rebuild credibility had exposed its foundation, and the strategy that was designed to balance two identities had been forced into one. No more middle ground, no more dual positioning, no more carefully walking both sides, just a choice that had already been made, and a consequence that was now impossible to avoid. As night fell, everything looked quieter, but that silence, it wasn't peace. It was aftermath, because something fundamental had shifted that day, not just for one event, not just for one brand, but for the entire idea of what was possible. The door that had once been left slightly open was now shut, and this time it wasn't opening again.